Hey guys, tonight we begin with a topic that's a little less philosophical and a lot more greasy: medieval junk food. You're about to slip back centuries into a world where snacks came sizzling in pig fat, sugar was rarer than a good king, and half the pleasure of eating was convincing yourself you wouldn't regret it later. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a bit of secondhand indigestion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling bold, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who else can't sleep and chooses to spend their midnight craving centuries-old pastries. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by walking along a cobbled lane where torches sputter in iron sconces and the night smells of wet hay and smoke. The market here is an unruly tangle of stalls, each one promising a treat that might be delicious or catastrophic. You find yourself drawn first to the stall with the biggest crowd. A woman in a patched apron is dropping lumps of something golden into a battered cauldron. When the oil bubbles up, she steps back just in time to avoid a splatter across her arms. Apple fritters, the closest thing this century has to a donut. If donuts were half charred, half sour, and fried in lard so old it should be paying rent. You wait your turn, studying the way she ladles the batter over gnarled apple chunks. Nothing like the supermarket fruit, you know. These apples are stubby, sharp-tasting, often picked from someone else's orchard when no one was looking. She drops them into the cauldron, and the smell makes your stomach clench with a longing that's part hunger, part mild fear. When your turn comes, she scoops one onto a scrap of parchment and hands it over without eye contact. You take a cautious bite. The edges are crisp enough to flake apart, the center so hot it nearly blisters your tongue. Under the batter, the apple is tart, almost defiant. You taste the faint sweetness of honey drizzled across the top, a luxury most peasants couldn't afford. If you'd been a noble, she might have dusted it with sugar, an ingredient so precious it was locked away like a crown jewel. Historians still argue whether sugar in these markets was a true sign of wealth or simply an affectation borrowed from Venetian traders trying to show off. You keep chewing anyway, because in a world of turnip porridge and questionable mutton, a scorched fritter counts as high cuisine. When you finish, you lick your fingertips and try to pretend you don't mind the greasy sheen left behind. You drift along the row of stalls, passing a man hawking tiny wheels of fresh cheese. Cheese curds, specifically, bite-sized and squeaky, in that way that makes you feel like you're chewing something that might argue back. You pick up a handful and pop one into your mouth. The taste is salty, vaguely milky, and just fresh enough to escape suspicion. Monks prized these curds for travel. Easy to carry, slow to spoil, and able to distract a hungry child for the better part of an afternoon. Some were soft and crumbly, others rubbery enough to bounce if you drop them, which you almost do when the merchant shoves a small sack into your hand, as though you've agreed to buy more. You set it back gently, feeling the weight of too many curious eyes on your back. Moving on, you stop near a cart lined with shallow baskets of dried fruit, figs, dates, raisins, so shriveled and dense they look like something rescued from the bottom of a storage jar. A woman in a linen coif offers you a fig, and you bite down carefully, feeling the seeds crunch like tiny gravel. Medieval people loved dried fruit. It was sweet, it traveled well, and it gave the illusion you were eating something rare. The fact that it stuck in your teeth for hours was simply part of the charm. You chew and swallow, then take a sip of ale from a chipped cup to wash it down. The ale is flat, tepid, and tastes faintly of the barrel it fermented in. But at least it doesn't actively offend your senses. You keep walking, the crowd pressing in around you. Somewhere to your left, a boy is hawking meat pasties, hand pies stuffed with whatever creature had the misfortune of wandering too close to the cook's knife. You pause to watch him pinch the edges closed with practiced speed. The filling smells of garlic, sage, and a trace of something you hope is venison. You buy one anyway, because curiosity outweighs caution tonight. You break it open, and steam billows out. The meat is coarse, fatty, and seasoned with enough pepper to make you sneeze. You take a careful bite, half expecting a bone shard, but find only a tender mouthful that tastes, improbably, like comfort. You linger by the pasty stall longer than you mean to, watching the boy mark each crust with initials so the buyers can tell theirs apart. Some crusts are thicker along one edge, a trick miners used. They'd hold that edge with dirty hands, then toss it away for the rats or the spirits. It's strange to think that even in a meal, this humble ritual found a way to slip in. Your path winds on. The cold seeps through your boots as you approach another stall where candied fennel seeds are cooling on a slab of polished slate. The seller waves you closer, offering a pinch. You accept, rolling a few glossy seeds between your fingers. They look innocent enough until you bite one in half and the sharp licorice flavor sears your tongue. Medieval folks believed these seeds could freshen breath and settle the stomach. And perhaps they did, assuming you survived the initial shock. You try not to cough as the sugar shell dissolves, leaving a sweetness so intense it almost redeems the aftertaste. Behind you, someone is bellowing about honey cakes, but you feel the ache of too many indulgences already. You drift to the edge of the market, where the noise thins into a gentler murmur. You lean against a worn timber post and watch the torches flare and gutter in the breeze. Historians still argue whether this casual marketplace feasting was a sign of prosperity or desperation. Some believe the endless stalls of cheap snacks spoke to abundance. Others argue it was proof that no one could afford proper meals. Standing here, you suspect the truth is a little of both. Necessity and pleasure tangled together like the batter around an apple fritter. You shift your weight, feeling the first true chill of night settle over your shoulders. In the flickering torchlight, you watch a woman tuck a wedge of hard cheese into her apron. A man pass a copper to a vendor with a look that's half apology. No matter the century, people gather around food to feel less alone. You take a last deep breath of the mingled smells: fried fat, stale ale, burnt honey. And you think, perhaps, that this was the greatest luxury of all. The chance to stand among strangers, warm something in your hands, and pretend the darkness at the edge of the square was just an ordinary night. You drift away from the bustle of the fritter stalls and the crackle of candied fennel, your hands still faintly sticky, and your senses swimming in the warm, greasy perfume of other people's dinner. A narrow lane slopes down from the square, lined with shuttered shops and dark doorways. The cobbles are slick with meltwater and whatever else trickled out from the taverns, so you walk carefully, the hem of your cloak brushing little splashes of ale and soot. Somewhere behind you, a bell tolls, deep, resonant, the sort of sound that makes you pause and count the strikes even when you don't care what hour it is. You keep moving, past a man asleep on a bundle of straw, his mouth slack around the last bite of a crust that probably began as a luxury and ended as a consolation. At the bottom of the slope, you find a little courtyard ringed with arches and a scattering of low wooden benches. A single brazier burns in the center, the coals pulsing red like a sleepy heartbeat. You pause in the doorway, surprised by the hush here, just the creak of timbers cooling in the night air and the quiet clink of pottery. A girl sits cross-legged by the brazier, tending a pot with a long iron spoon. She glances up, her face smudged with flour and the focused fatigue of someone who has been cooking since dawn. You nod, and she gestures to a rough plank table where small stacks of bread rest under thin linen cloths. You approach, curiosity tugging you past the reasonable hesitation. On the table, round loaves sit beside a deep bowl of something you don't immediately recognize. You lean in, squinting in the firelight. Ale-soaked bread. The medieval answer to every question no one wanted to ask. What do you eat when the bread is stale, the ale is flat, and the day is too long? You pick up a piece, weighing it in your palm. It sags under its own dampness, heavy as regret. This humble concoction went by many names: soups, trench toast, sops. Whatever you called it, the principle was the same: soften old bread in something that wouldn't make you sick. Historians still debate whether ale sops were a treat or a last resort. Some argue it was beloved for its comforting warmth. Others think it was simply a strategy to avoid wasting calories when options were scarce. You bite carefully. The texture is almost luxurious compared to dry crust, but the flavor is an education. Bitter with fermented grain, with a strange sweetness from the dregs of ale. You chew slowly, trying not to imagine what else might be lurking in the crevices. The girl returns to her stirring, as though your presence has been weighed and found harmless. You watch her work the spoon through the simmering mass, the scent rising in an herbal cloud that doesn't quite cover the sharp tang of yeast. A figure appears in the far archway, an older man carrying a wicker basket draped in a cloth. He shuffles to the table and lifts the covering to reveal a stack of small, thin cakes. You recognize them even before he says a word. Honey cakes. Here, at last, is something that feels like real indulgence. You reach for one, and the man nods as if he's been expecting you. The cake is dense, sticky at the edges, the surface imprinted with the faint pattern of the cloth that covered it. When you tear off a piece, it stretches a little before breaking. More chew than crumble. The first bite is sweet, in a way that makes you close your eyes. Honey, flour, a hint of something spiced. Nutmeg, maybe, or the last whisper of a clove. The second bite is better, the flavor richer as the warmth from your palm softens the crumb. You eat the whole thing before you realize it, licking the syrup from your fingers without caring who's watching. A little voice in your mind reminds you that in this era, sugar was locked up like treasure. Even honey wasn't always easy to come by. Beekeepers braved stings, bad weather, and thieves to fill their hives. In some regions, monks controlled the best apiaries, rationing their liquid gold to those who could afford to buy indulgence by the spoonful. You wonder, as you set aside the crumpled scrap of cloth, whether the monks who sold honey considered it a sacred act, or merely a clever sideline. Historians still argue whether monastic honey sales were pious fundraising or opportunistic commerce. You suspect the truth is the same as always? Both. When you look up, the girl is watching you with a weary amusement. She gestures at the pot. You tilt your head in question, and she taps the rim, inviting you to see. You step closer, peering into the brew. Bread, pudding. Not the fluffy sort you'd find centuries later, but a medieval version. Bread soaked in ale and sweetened with a handful of raisins or dried plums if you were lucky. The mixture bubbles lazily, and the scent is softer than you expect. You nod politely and step back, unsure whether to feel hunger or caution. The man gathers his basket and ambles away into the dark, humming a tune too low to catch. You stay by the brazier, letting the heat leach into your chilled hands. In the quiet, you notice little details you missed before. A faded carving of a stag's head above the arch, the deep grooves in the stone threshold, the way the wind hums around the corners, like it's looking for something. You stand there a while, breathing in the mingled smells of honey, yeast, and wood smoke. The hush feels gentler than the market's chaos, but it still carries an edge, like a story waiting to be told, if only someone would ask the right question. You think of the cheese curds in your pocket, the sweetness still clinging to your teeth, the ache in your feet. You wonder how many other nights unfolded just like this, in courtyards and squares across centuries, with ordinary people taking comfort where they could find it. You realize, perhaps, that the most enduring part of all this is not the recipes, but the ritual. Standing together in the cold, sharing something warm, and believing that tomorrow might be easier, because tonight, you tasted something good. You shift your weight, feeling your knees protest the long hours. The brazier pops as a coal splits with a bright spark. You step away, your shadow stretching out across the stones behind you. As you walk toward the next archway, you glance back. The girl has turned her attention to another pot, the steady rhythm of her stirring the only sound in the courtyard. You slip into the dark passage, feeling the warmth fade from your skin. And though the chill creeps in again, you carry the sweetness of the honey cake in your mouth like a small, stubborn promise. You take the next step as if it might crack open the floor beneath you. The corridor stretches ahead, narrower now, pressed in by walls so close they could have been carved by the ribs of a sleeping giant. Your torch flares, illuminating a faint trail of footprints in the dust. Small ones, lighter than yours. You try not to imagine who or what made them. Down here, the air grows colder, tasting of wet limestone and something else. Something stale. A chill creeps up the back of your neck. A whisper of breath you don't remember exhaling. You edge forward until the corridor abruptly widens into the undercroft. The ceiling dips so low you have to crouch, brushing damp stones with your shoulder as you slip inside. It's colder here than anywhere else you've been tonight. The temperature drops so sharply, Your teeth clack together. You wonder if this was once an ice house, or maybe a dungeon. Historians still argue whether this chamber stored provisions or prisoners, though honestly, it probably managed both. Efficiency was always a medieval virtue. Your torch sputters in protest, but you hold it higher. The light reveals rows of massive barrels lined up like mute sentinels. Their iron hoops are crusted with rust, the wood blackened with time and moisture. You trail your free hand along one barrel's surface, the cold seeping into your fingertips. A small thrill prickles through you. This place feels closer to the heartbeat of the fortress than any grand hall ever could. Something drips steadily in a far corner, a slow, patient rhythm. You follow the sound, each step echoing louder than you'd like. When you find the source, you stop. A cracked cistern squats in the gloom, half full of brackish water. You tilt your torch and peer in, expecting to see nothing but silt and shadows. But for a moment, the reflection shows a shape behind you. Tall, indistinct, watching. You spin, heart hammering so loud it nearly drowns out your own ragged breathing. There is nothing, only the rows of barrels and your own panicked silhouette painted on the walls. You swallow the acid tang of fear, determined not to let it win. This is just a place. Old, crumbling, indifferent. You're alone because you chose to be. You lean against the nearest barrel, trying to slow your pulse. The wood is cold and slick with condensation. For a moment, you imagine you can hear something moving inside it, a soft, deliberate shifting. You tell yourself it's your imagination. You almost believe it. There's a workbench at the far end of the chamber. You cross to it, passing old tools scattered like relics of a forgotten trade. Iron tongs, a warped mallet, a wooden ladle stained so dark it's impossible to guess what it once carried. You pick it up and turn it over in your palm, feeling the weight of other hands that have held it. Hands that might still linger in this air, if you believed such things. You set the ladle down carefully, feeling a little absurd for handling it, as though it might crumble or curse you. Along one wall, a set of shelves sag under the weight of glazed jugs and clay pots. You slide one free and lift the lid. The smell that puffs out is so pungent, you nearly gag. Whatever was inside died a very long time ago and is in no hurry to leave. You ease the lid back on, taking a cautious step away. In the gloom, a shape catches your eye. A thick iron ring bolted to the floor, linked to a length of chain. You don't need to guess what it was for. You can almost see the phantom of a prisoner, huddled against the damp, waiting for a mercy that never came. Your torch snaps and pops, and you flinch. You're jumpy now, more than you'd like to admit. You wonder if the fortress can sense it. A soft rush of air slides across your cheek like a sigh. You spin again, torch lifted, but there is nothing except the cold and the unblinking dark. You've read accounts of undercrofts like this, how they were used to store barrels of salted meat, grains, and occasionally bodies no one wanted to bury properly. The line between a storeroom and a crypt was often just a matter of convenience. You take a slow breath, feeling the chill sink through your clothes and settle in your bones. You remind yourself you're here to learn, to see, to walk where others once feared to tread. But you can't deny the prickle at your spine, the sense that someone is standing just behind you. Always just behind you, patient and invisible. You edge along the wall, one hand trailing over the damp stones. The corridor back to the main hall waits ahead, a thin slit of darkness that almost looks inviting compared to this cold. You pause once more, turning a slow circle with your torch held high. The barrels watch in their mute, rotting way. The iron ring glints like a dark promise. When you finally step back into the corridor, the air feels warmer by comparison. You exhale, relief and dread tangled together in your chest. Behind you, the undercroft settles with a groan, stone shifting against stone. Or maybe something else shifting in the dark. You don't look back, because you already know you'd see something you wouldn't forget. You emerge from the undercroft feeling like you've crawled out of some subterranean lung. The air tastes cleaner here, though it still clings to your tongue with the mineral tang of old mortar. Your torch wavers in your grip as you press on, deeper into the labyrinth. The corridor rises gently, each step lifting you from the darkness you left behind. The stones here are smoother, the walls closer to vertical than anywhere else in the fortress. Maybe this part was repaired more recently, or maybe it was simply built to last longer than the lives it sheltered. A few paces ahead, you find a door. Unlike the others, splintered or hanging by a single hinge, this one is mostly intact. Heavy oak, bound in iron bands etched with pitted crosses. You rest your palm against it, half expecting it to pulse warm beneath your touch. It doesn't, but it feels significant, like the last threshold before something you can't explain. You draw a slow breath and push. The hinges shriek in protest, a cry so loud you nearly drop the torch. The door swings inward, revealing a small chamber that smells of stale incense and wet plaster. This must have been the hidden chapel. You step inside. The air shifts, heavier somehow, as though the walls are remembering things they'd rather forget. Light from your torch spills over a faded fresco covering the far wall. Once, it must have been a riot of color. Saints with solemn eyes, angels in impossible flight. Now, it's a ghost painting, pigments leached to the memory of color, faces half dissolved by damp centuries. Your footsteps echo in the hush. This space feels holier than you expected, and holier doesn't always mean safer. A cracked altar sits at the front, draped in a threadbare cloth that might have once been white. The stone is gouged by deep scratches, whether from vandalism or desperation, you can't say. You set your torch carefully in a sconce and step closer. Someone has left an offering here. A little pile of smooth river stones stacked with deliberate care. You can almost feel the intention behind them, a kind of plea or apology. On a ledge above the altar sits a wooden cross, warped by time and split along the grain. You reach for it, then stop. Some things are better left untouched. Instead, you kneel, the cold seeping into your knees. You don't know why. Maybe because the air demands it. Maybe because it feels like the right thing to do, though you haven't prayed in years. The hush is complete, a silence so thick it feels alive. You bow your head, and then you hear it, a scrape, somewhere behind you. Slow, measured, deliberate. You freeze. A heartbeat later, you force yourself to look over your shoulder. The door you left ajar now stands open wider, the darkness beyond as black as a forgotten well. Your throat tightens. You tell yourself it was the wind, but the air here doesn't move. You rise, careful not to disturb the little tower of river stones. Along the side walls, more frescoes lean out of the gloom. One shows a crowned figure, face erased by time. holding something you can't quite identify. Something that might be a sword or a scepter, or something less noble altogether. Historians still argue whether this was a depiction of a saint or a warlord who paid for the chapel's construction as an act of piety or penance. At the far end, a small wooden door sits low in the wall. You crouch and peer through its slats, expecting only darkness. But your torchlight catches a gleam of metal. You push the door open with 2 fingers. Inside is a niche lined with shelves, candlesticks, chalices, a small iron-bound chest. You reach for the lid, pause, then lift it. Inside, a handful of silver coins lie scattered among scraps of parchment. You brush aside the brittle paper and see a carved wooden rosary, darkened by the sweat of countless fingers. You pick it up, feeling the weight of 1,000 whispered prayers. The beads are polished smooth, comforting in your palm. You set it back with care. In the hush, you can almost hear voices, thin as cobwebs, layering over one another in a language older than the walls themselves. You turn a slow circle, listening. The torch spits a little shower of sparks, snapping you back to yourself. You step from the storage niche and cross back to the main altar. On the floor, you notice a pattern you missed before. Stones inlaid in a crude cross, surrounded by a circle. It looks older than anything else here, as though the chapel was built on something even more ancient. Your gut clenches. You press your palm to the circle's center, half expecting it to be warm, but it's cold as the undercroft. You stand. It's time to move on. As you leave the chapel, you glance back one last time. The fresco of the crowned figure seems to watch you, hollow gaze, steady. You close the heavy oak door behind you, the iron bands rasping over the threshold, and in that moment, you feel something settle in the dark behind you. A presence content to wait another century, or another night, for the next intruder to wander in. You follow the winding passage out of the courtyard, the last warmth of the brazier fading from your hands. The air beyond the arches smells sharper, tinged with something mineral, like wet stone, scraped clean by the wind. You take a few steps and find yourself in a long arcade where torchlight wavers against carved pillars. Here and there, the flames gutter low, revealing alcoves where vendors crouch over steaming pots and baskets. At first, you think you've stumbled onto another stew cellar, but as you edge closer, the smell gives it away. The unmistakable tang of hot oil clinging to battered meat. You pause by a stall where a man in a soot-black apron is pulling small parcels from a wide iron pan. He moves with the unhurried assurance of someone who has fried more things than you can imagine. He glances up, sees you hovering, and lifts a pasty dripping with grease. You nod cautiously, and he gestures to a cracked wooden plank piled high with identical turnovers, some small as your palm, some big enough to serve as a meal. A thin line of steam rises from the broken edges of the closest one. You reach out and take it, feeling the crust yield a little under your fingers. The pastry is thick, browned almost to black in places, and the smell is, well, promising. You break it open carefully, watching the filling spill out. Minced meat laced with pale threads of onion and a confetti of dried herbs. You bite into the edge. The crust is salty and almost smoky where it's scorched, the filling warm and crumbly on your tongue. It's better than you expected, richer, with a savor that makes you wonder what exactly passed for meat here. In medieval kitchens, that could mean pork, mutton, rabbit, pigeon, or anything that once moved under its own power. Historians still debate whether cooks bothered to distinguish when times were lean. A 14th century recipe mentions flesh of best savor, which is charmingly vague. The cook watches your face with mild curiosity. You nod in thanks and take another bite. The pastry flakes into your palm. You have to shift your grip before half the filling ends up in the dust. A breeze coils through the arcade, stirring the corners of a faded tapestry. You taste pepper and something faintly bitter that might be wild garlic, or maybe the memory of the pan itself. You swallow anyway. Somewhere further along the row, you hear the creak of a handcart and the low murmur of a seller hawking wares. You move on, still chewing, your steps sticking a little as oil seeps into the sole of your boot. The next stall is smaller, with no sign, only a scattering of small clay bowls lined up in careful rows. A woman stands behind them, her hair bound in a coif that leaves only a few silver wisps escaping. She's humming under her breath as she pours something thick and pale into each vessel. You lean closer, trying to guess what it is. Cheese. But not the smooth rounds or crumbling wedges you'd expect. This is a different creature entirely. Fresh, soft, curds still bound together by warmth. She dips her ladle again, and you catch the faint sourness rising from the bucket. She gestures, offering you one of the bowls. You take it, weighing it in your hand. The curds shift a little, squeaking softly against the clay. You can't help but smile. It feels absurdly alive. You scoop a small bite with your fingertip. The texture is somewhere between soft butter and a damp sponge, yielding but not quite collapsing. You taste salt first, then the grassy tang of milk, only hours from the cow. It's mild, almost delicate, until the aftertaste sneaks up on you. A faint bitterness that makes you wonder if it's ripening already. The woman gives a knowing nod, as though she's seen this reaction more times than she can count. You glance at the other bowls, noticing the subtle differences. Some nearly liquid, some set firm enough to slice. Cheese curds were the snack of travelers and monks alike, portable, nourishing, and oddly satisfying, even when they tasted a little off. Monasteries produced vast quantities, using rennet from calf stomachs to curdle the milk. If you pause to consider that detail too long, you might lose your appetite. But you don't. You take another small taste and set the bowl back with a polite nod, a fact you can't help recalling. In certain abbeys, cheese was used as a form of rent. Tenants would deliver wheels or baskets of curds in lieu of coin. Historians still argue whether this practice was a fair exchange or a thinly veiled form of exploitation. You suspect the peasants weren't given much say. You thank the woman and drift away, licking a smear of curd from your knuckle. Further on, another brazier throws off a shimmering wave of heat. A boy crouches beside it, turning small cakes over with a flat iron blade. You slow to watch. Each cake is the size of your palm, mottled gold and brown, the edges darkened by the licking flames. Honey cakes again, but here they look rougher, less precious. The batter is flecked with something dark you can't place until you catch the scent. Dried berries, maybe black currants or shriveled bilberries scavenged from the edge of a field. The boy offers you one without a word. You take it, feeling the crust give under your thumb. You tear a piece free and taste, sweet and earthy at once, the honey tangled with something tart that makes your mouth water. The center is dense enough to stop a knife, but it tastes like a festival, or at least the closest most people here would get to one. A gust of wind rattles the braziers, and the boy looks up sharply, as though expecting trouble. But the arcade stays quiet, only the shifting shadows of other vendors and buyers crossing in and out of the torchlight. You finish your honey cake slowly, savoring the last sticky crumbs. For a moment, the night feels almost warm. You set the wadded cloth aside and press your hands to the front of your cloak, feeling the mingled smells, smoke, hot sugar, frying lard, soaked into the wool. When you look around, you realize you're nearly alone here. The crowd has thinned, drifting back to the main square or vanishing down alleys. The last vendors are packing their baskets, tapping ash from spent coals, wiping grease from their palms with rags that never get quite clean. You take a step toward the exit arch, your feet heavy, your tongue still bright with the memory of sweetness. And you think, just for a moment, that you understand why these humble indulgences mattered so much. In a life measured by toil and scarcity, a warm pasty or a handful of curds was more than food. It was proof that you were still here, still hungry, still human. You pass into the darkness beyond the arcade, the hush of the night settling around you like a quilt. And even as the chill returns, you carry the taste with you, a reminder that sometimes survival is measured in small, stubborn pleasures. You hurry down the corridor, the torch flickering, as if it shares your unease. The hush of the guard room clings to your shoulders like a damp cloak, and no matter how many steps you put between yourself and that fallen playing piece, the feeling of being watched refuses to loosen its grip. You come to a wide archway, the stones above it carved in a pattern of interlocking spirals. The mortar has split along the joins, leaving hairline cracks that seem to radiate outward like frost. You duck beneath it, emerging into what must once have been the banquet hall. Even in ruin, the room feels vast. The vaulted ceiling soars above you, blackened ribs of timber crisscrossing overhead like the ribcage of a petrified beast. Your torchlight dances across long trestle tables, some collapsed under their own weight, others still standing in defiance of centuries. You pause on the threshold, absorbing the hush. If you listen, really listen, you can almost hear the echo of revelry. Tankards slamming onto tabletops, laughter, shouts, the scrape of chairs. 1,000 moments layered on top of each other until the air itself feels saturated with memory. You step forward, boots crunching over fragments of shattered crockery. A pewter plate lies in two neat halves, split by time or violence. Who can say? Along the left wall, an immense hearth yawns wide, black with soot. Someone etched words into the stones above the mantel. You tilt your torch to read them, but the script is too worn, the meaning lost. You trail your hand along the edge of the table closest to the fire. The wood is scarred with gouges, as though someone dragged a blade across it again and again, either in anger or boredom. At the far end of the hall, a raised dais supports what remains of a high table. The chairs there are taller, their backs carved with symbols, crowns, crossed swords, a rearing stag. Here the Lord and his favored guests would have sat, surveying the room with a sense of entitlement that no drafty hall could diminish. You climb the steps to the dais and set your torch in a rusted sconce. The hall stretches before you, an ocean of darkness cut by your lone flame. Somewhere below, near the hearth, a scrap of fabric flutters in the breeze that shouldn't exist. You close your eyes and let the cold seep in. You imagine the feast, slabs of meat glistening with fat, trenchers soaked through with gravy, pitchers of ale poured until the stone floor ran slick. You can almost taste it, salt and iron and something sour on the back of your tongue. There was always a risk to eating in a place like this. Historians still argue whether this hall was ever truly safe, or if every celebration teetered on the brink of violence. A knife slipped between ribs over a grudge, a cup of wine laced with something you couldn't taste until it was too late. You open your eyes. The hall is empty again. You step down from the dais, skirting a pile of collapsed chairs. Your torch throws light into the shadows beneath the tables, illuminating a tangle of bones you first mistake for fallen beams. But no, the shapes are too fine, too curved. Rib cages, a single skull. You crouch, studying the remains. Not buried, not hidden. Just left here. As though the last feast ended in a haste no one dared question. A draft stirs again, carrying with it the faint scent of mildew and something older, something almost sweet. You straighten and turn toward the massive windows lining the opposite wall. Most of the glass is gone, leaving jagged teeth of lead-tracing empty panes. Moonlight spills through the gaps, pooling in pale puddles across the floor. You cross to the nearest window and lean out. The courtyard below is silent, a patchwork of frost and weeds. You pull back before you can wonder what might be watching from the grass. At the far end of the hall, a set of double doors stands ajar. Beyond them, the darkness thickens, as though reluctant to let you pass. You retrieve your torch and walk slowly toward the threshold. As you pass each table, you can't help but imagine hands reaching out, fingers curling around your ankles, trying to hold you here. Your mind is playing tricks on you, that's all. You pause before the doors, resting one hand against the cold wood, and then you hear it. A murmur of voices layered over each other, impossible to separate. You can't understand the words, but the tone is unmistakable. 100 conversations paused to watch you. You take a steadying breath. You push the doors open. For a moment, the shadows rush forward, swallowing your torchlight. Then the darkness recedes, and you step into the next chamber, feeling the banquet hall's memory peel away from your skin. But behind you, in the hush that follows, you swear the voices resume. As if relieved you're gone. Section 7. The doors shut behind you with a soft thump, and you're left in a space that feels at once smaller and infinitely more dangerous. The air here is dense, close, tinged with the faintest whiff of old vellum. You realize where you are almost at once. The library. You lift your torch and turn in a slow circle. Tall shelves line the walls, some still standing, others collapsed in tired heaps. Books and scrolls are scattered across the floor, their bindings split, their pages curling with damp. You step carefully over a fallen ledger. The ink bled into a blurry tide of meaningless lines. There's an oppressive hush here, different from the quiet of the banquet hall. This is the silence of secrets and the certainty that some things were never meant to be read. You approach a shelf that remains intact, though it leans forward like a drunk about to pitch face first into the dirt. With your free hand, you tug a leather-bound tome from the lowest row. The cover is stamped with an emblem you don't recognize, a stylized flame surrounded by a ring of thorns. The book is heavier than you expect. When you open it, the pages release a stale gust of air that smells faintly of mold and something chemical, like an ancient remedy gone rancid. You skim the lines, Latin, or something that pretends to be. The words crawl across the page in a hand that tightens your throat. You shut the book before you can convince yourself to try deciphering it. Setting it gently on a toppled chair, you move on. Along the far wall, a desk sits beneath a broken window. You cross to it, boots crunching over parchment. Someone once worked here, you realize. A scribe or a steward or some scholar pressed into the Lord's service. Maybe all three. A cluster of candles in rusted holders droops along the edge of the desk. One has melted entirely over the wood, leaving a waxy stalagmite. You touch it with a finger. Cold. Beside the candles lies a scroll, still bound with a strip of cracked leather. You untie it, feeling the old tension in the strap as it gives way. The parchment unfurls with a sigh. Lines of cramped writing fill the surface, punctuated by diagrams you can't quite decipher. Circles and intersecting lines. Shapes that might be astronomical charts or diagrams of something less innocent. You look away before your mind can start making connections you'd rather not. Historians still argue whether libraries like this were repositories of knowledge or of power. Some claim noble houses hoarded forbidden texts, grimoires, heretical treatises, recipes for poisons that left no trace. You suspect all of it was true, and none of it, depending on who was telling the story. You move to the next shelf. More books, some tiny as prayer books, others enormous ledgers bound in cracked hide. A few are chained to the wood itself, as though someone feared they might slip away. You tug on one of the chains experimentally. It holds fast. A draft slithers across your ankle. You stiffen, glancing back over your shoulder. The double doors stand closed. No wind, no movement. You bend, angling your torch along the floor. A narrow gap yawns between two flagstones, just wide enough to swallow your foot if you're careless. You ease back, unwilling to test the depth of that darkness. Something shifts behind you, a soft scrape of leather over leather. You whirl, heart hammering. One of the books has slid from the shelf. It lands spine down with a dull thud, pages splaying open in a fan. You wait, breath locked in your throat, listening. Nothing follows. With a trembling hand, you pick up the fallen book and set it back in place. Enough. You step away from the shelves and cross to a tall cabinet tucked in a corner. Its doors gape, revealing rows of cubbies stuffed with brittle sheaves of correspondence. Wax seals broken, ribbons browned to the color of old tobacco. You lift a single letter. The script is precise, the ink faded to brown. A date you can't quite parse hovers above the salutation. The message is short, a plea for aid or absolution. You can't tell. You replace it before the words can root themselves too firmly in your mind. In the corner nearest the door, a lectern stands alone. A single volume lies open there, splayed wide like a gutted bird. You approach, though every nerve in your body insists you shouldn't. The text is in that same cramped hand, though the language seems different, less familiar. Along the margins, notations scrawl in a frantic counterpoint. You read a single line aloud under your breath. The air shifts, as though the room exhaled. You slam the book shut, The torch sputters in your grasp, a flare of sparks spitting toward the ceiling. You retreat a step, then another, until your back meets the door. For a moment, you consider staying, trying to understand what's written here. But some instinct older than curiosity demands you leave. And for once, you listen. Your hand finds the latch. You slip through the door into the corridor, feeling the library's gaze cling to your shoulders as the door swings shut. You don't look back. Some knowledge costs too much. The corridor feels almost merciful after the library, like stepping from a storm into a calm so complete it makes your ears ring. You pause to collect yourself, leaning your forehead briefly against the cold stone. The torch in your hand is a comfort, but you can't shake the sensation that it's also a signal, calling out your presence to whatever else might linger here. You push away from the wall and continue. The passage narrows, ceiling pressing low enough that you must duck. You count each step in your head, anything to quiet the drumbeat of your pulse. 12 steps. Then the corridor opens into a chamber so abruptly you stop short. The Queen's chamber. You know it before you see the traces of luxury, now reduced to tatters and dust. This room was built to impress. Even in decay, the intention seeps through every detail. The height of the ceiling, the proportions of the walls, the graceful curve of the windows that once held colored glass. Your torchlight catches on the remnants of drapery hanging limp along the walls, scraps of velvet so faded they're the color of bruised petals. A scent clings here, sweet and stale, old perfume woven into the stones themselves. You step inside, your breath misting in the chill. To your left, an immense bed dominates the space. The canopy droops in tatters, the frame carved with delicate vines. On the pillow, a shape glitters in the flickering light. You approach cautiously. It's a circlet, wrought in silver and inset with dull stones. A crown, perhaps, but not one made for state ceremonies. This is smaller, more intimate. An ornament meant for private moments. You don't touch it. Instead, you study the headboard. Tiny gouges pock the polished wood, as if someone once dug in fingernails during some night you'd rather not imagine. You back away, uneasy. Historians still argue whether the queen who slept here was a prisoner or a consort. Some say she was loved. Others claim she was hidden, kept from view when her influence became an inconvenience. No record agrees, but the hush in this room feels heavy with a single truth. She was lonely. A dressing table slumps against the far wall. You cross to it, stepping over the collapsed remains of a footstool. The mirror is cracked into a web of silver lines. You lift your torch, and a dozen fractured reflections blink back at you. For a moment, you almost expect to see another face beside your own. You set the torch in a brass holder and open the top drawer. Inside, a scatter of objects remains where some last hand abandoned them. A comb with teeth missing, a pot of rouge hardened to a rust-colored lump, a silk ribbon tied in a drooping bow. You pick up the ribbon. It feels too light in your palm, as though it might float away if you don't hold it firmly. You wonder who tied it, whose hair it bound, whether they ever left this room. A draft curls around your ankles. You glance down and notice a vent set into the floor, a narrow grill you might have overlooked in the dark. Cool air rises through it in irregular breaths, as if the fortress itself is breathing. You leave the ribbon in the drawer and cross to the window. Outside, moonlight pools over the courtyard, catching on shards of old glass like scattered coins. You press your palm to the sill, feeling how cold the stone has become. Behind you, the darkness shifts, just slightly, enough to make your scalp prickle. You turn. The crown on the pillow is no longer where you left it. Your breath catches. It has rolled or been moved, so it faces you directly, like an accusation or an invitation. You take one step closer, then stop. The hush thickens. You can almost feel her here, whoever she was, watching to see whether you'll claim what she left behind. You don't. Instead, you back away, your hands raised in a gesture of apology you can't articulate. The moment stretches, taut and thin, and then the air releases you. You snatch up your torch and step away from the bed. At the doorway, you glance back. The crown gleams in the torchlight, stubbornly waiting for someone braver or more foolish to take it. You leave it. Some relics aren't meant to be carried out. The hall beyond feels less like escape than reprieve. You stand a moment, your breath ragged, as the darkness behind you folds itself back into stillness, and in that quiet, you promise yourself you'll remember her, not as a footnote, but as a warning. You don't linger in the corridor. You move quickly now, each step an effort to shake off the image of the Queen's chamber, the crown, the mirror, the feeling of a gaze you couldn't see, but still somehow felt. The passage bends sharply to the left, and when you round the corner, you find yourself in a gallery lined with portraits, or what's left of them. Torchlight flickers across row upon row of tall wooden panels, each bearing the likeness of someone long dead. Faces stare back, some half erased by mold or smoke, others eerily intact. Their eyes follow you, painted irises fixed in an unblinking vigil that has outlasted generations. You draw in a slow breath. The air smells of damp canvas and rotting wood. It's colder here, and when you exhale, your breath drifts in pale ribbons. You step closer to the nearest portrait, a man in black armor, hand resting on the pommel of a sword. His mouth is set in a hard line. The plaque below bears a name you can't quite read, but it hardly matters. You can already guess his story. Conquest, ambition, the arrogance of believing history would remember him kindly. You walk on. The next painting shows a woman in a crimson gown, her hair woven with pearls. She looks younger than you expected, no more than 20. But her eyes are old, hollow in a way you don't want to think about too long. You imagine she sat for this portrait out of duty, not vanity. Historians still argue whether she was a ruler in her own right, or a bride offered up to seal an alliance. Either way, she watches you now, her painted stare a silent accusation. You press on. Halfway down the gallery, you pause before a smaller portrait. Just a child, no more than 6 or 7. One hand clutches a wooden toy, the other raised in a gesture that could be a wave or a plea. A crack runs through the panel, splitting the child's face neatly in two. Something twists behind your ribs. You step back, unwilling to meet those eyes any longer. You move on, though every instinct urges you to turn and leave this place to its ghosts. At the far end, the gallery opens into a wide alcove. Here, a pair of portraits dominate the space. A man and a woman, each seated in high-backed chairs, their faces captured in meticulous detail. You recognize the sigil on the woman's gown, a rearing stag, the same you glimpsed carved into the Queen's chamber headboard. You wonder if these were her parents or her jailers. You lift your torch higher, studying their expressions. The woman's eyes are calm, almost kind. The man's are anything but. Even in paint, they seem to glower at you, alive with the certainty that you don't belong here. You look away first. In the hush that follows, you hear a sound, soft, deliberate, like cloth sliding over stone. You spin, heart hammering. No one stands behind you. You swallow hard, willing your pulse to slow. It doesn't. A draft stirs the edge of your cloak. You glance down. The flagstones beneath your feet are uneven, each slab worn with countless footsteps. You wonder how many generations crossed this gallery to look up at these faces, seeking guidance or approval or absolution. You suspect they didn't find it. A sudden cold brushes your cheek. You flinch, raising the torch instinctively. One of the portraits, the child, has shifted. The cracked panel tilts forward as though bowing. Your throat goes dry. You step closer, your free hand outstretched. The portrait shivers under your touch, the wood cold as a corpse. You ease it back into place, your skin crawling. As you do, you notice something behind it, a small cavity hollowed into the wall. Inside rests a scrap of folded linen, stained brown with something you'd rather not identify. You don't touch it. Some secrets deserve to stay buried. You back away, careful not to disturb any more of the painted watchers. At the threshold of the alcove, you pause to look back one last time. The portraits seem to lean closer in the flickering light, as if waiting to see what you'll do next. You take a slow breath. "I'm just passing through," you whisper. The hush deepens, swallowing the words whole. And for a moment, just a moment, you swear you see movement behind the eyes of the man in the black armor. You don't wait to be sure. You turn and slip back into the corridor, the torch held high, your footsteps brisk. Behind you, the gallery settles into silence again, content for now to let you go. The gallery's chill follows you into the next corridor, clinging to your skin even as you move faster, eager to put distance between yourself and the painted watchers. You pause when the passage slopes downward, the flagstones gleaming with damp. Here the ceiling dips so low you have to crouch. Your torch scrapes soot across the stones above, shedding little black flakes that drift past your face like ash. The air changes again, warmer now, though it smells worse. Stagnant water, mildew, the sour tang of something you can't quite name. You reach the bottom of the slope and step into a space so wide your torch barely grazes the walls. You turn slowly, trying to understand where you've arrived. The cistern. You recognize it from old accounts, a vast underground reservoir carved straight into the bedrock. In times of siege, this chamber was life itself, holding water enough to outlast any enemy. Now it holds only shadows. You walk to the edge of the stone platform, peering into the darkness below. The water is still there, black as oil, reflecting the torch in long, wavery lines. You toss a small pebble in. The ripples spread so slowly, it's as if the liquid itself resents being disturbed. You step back, feeling unease prickle your spine. Historians still argue whether the cistern was ever truly secure. Some say the water was poisoned more than once, by accident or by design. A single cask of tainted grain could sicken an entire garrison, and the fortress's enemies knew it. You skirt the perimeter, careful to keep to the broadest flagstones. Here and there, iron rings are set into the floor, once used to lash barrels in place when the water rose. One ring has pulled free, leaving a ragged hole big enough to snap an ankle. At the far end of the platform, a stair curves downward into the dark. You hesitate, But curiosity wins. You start to descend. The steps are slick with algae. You move carefully, one hand braced on the cold wall. Your torch flares as if in warning, the shadows drawing back reluctantly. Halfway down, you pause to catch your breath. The air tastes of wet stone and old decay. You swallow against the tightness in your throat and keep going. At the base of the stairs, a narrow walkway traces the edge of the cistern pool. Here the ceiling presses close overhead, so low you feel it graze your hair when you straighten. You advance, each footstep landing with a soft slap. Along the wall, niches have been carved at intervals. Some hold rusted buckets or iron ladles. Others are empty, waiting, it seems, for someone to fill them again. You lift your torch to peer into one recess and find something unexpected. A carved figure, no taller than your forearm. A woman, her hands cupped in prayer, her face worn nearly smooth by centuries of damp. You draw back. Maybe she was left as a blessing, or a plea, or an apology no one else ever heard. A splash interrupts your thoughts. You spin, the torch sweeping a wide arc. The water is still again, perfectly still. You strain to listen. Nothing. You turn back to the walkway. You take another step, another splash, closer this time. Your skin crawls. You tell yourself it's just debris, something slipping loose from a ledge. But you don't entirely believe it. You pick up your pace, moving quickly now along the edge. The darkness beyond your torch feels thicker here, as though it's trying to condense around you. At the far wall, a ladder rises toward a trapdoor in the ceiling. You grip a rung experimentally. The iron is slick but solid. Another splash, just behind you. You climb. The rungs shudder under your weight. You keep your eyes fixed on the trapdoor overhead, refusing to look back at the water. 3 more rungs. Another splash. This one so close you feel droplets strike your boots. You climb faster. You reach the top and shove the trapdoor with your shoulder. It doesn't move. For a moment, panic clamps your chest. You set the torch on a narrow ledge, both hands pressed flat against the wood. You push harder. With a groan, the trapdoor shifts, then swings upward. Cold air pours over you like relief. You haul yourself through, rolling onto your back, chest heaving. Below, the cistern falls silent. You sit up. The chamber you've entered is smaller. A storeroom, judging by the sagging shelves and crates piled in the corners. You retrieve the torch, your hand trembling. The trapdoor settles shut with a soft thump. You exhale, slow and shaky. The fortress is quiet again, but you know it's only waiting. You sit on the cold floor for a moment longer, catching your breath. Your heart hammers so loud it feels like the fortress itself must hear it, if it hasn't been listening all along. When you finally rise, your knees protest. The torch throws wild shadows over the little storeroom, shapes that jitter and stretch across the ceiling. You steady the flame and take in the space properly. Shelves sag under the weight of crates and sacks, long since split open. Mice or mold have left the contents in indistinct heaps, impossible to identify. You cross to the nearest shelf, curiosity winning out over dread. A length of cloth lies folded among the debris. You lift a corner carefully, revealing a tarnished silver plate beneath it. The surface is etched with a familiar crest, a stag rearing over crossed branches. You've seen that emblem before, in the Queen's chamber. You set the plate back down, feeling a chill that has nothing to do with the air. Beside the plate lies a narrow wooden box. You flip the latch and ease it open. Inside, 4 delicate glass vials nestle in padded grooves. One has cracked, the contents long evaporated. The other 3 remain sealed, liquid glinting in the torchlight. You don't touch them. Historians still argue whether the lords of this place were known for healing or poisoning. If these vials held medicine or something less forgiving. You shut the box and step back, letting the darkness reclaim the shelf. A narrow doorway gapes in the far wall, almost hidden behind a toppled barrel. You pick your way over and peer through. A staircase descends steeply, each tread warped by damp. You hesitate, then start down. The steps creak under your boots. You move carefully, one hand braced on the wall until you emerge into a hallway lined with narrow cells. Prisoners. You don't need any plaque to tell you what this place was. You feel it in your bones, the desperation steeped into the stones. The first cell is empty, save for a scattering of straw. You crouch, touching the floor. The straw is brittle, breaking under your fingers. You stand and move to the next door. The iron lattice set into it is warped, the hinges sagging. You lean close to the bars, torch held high. A shape crouches in the corner, no more than a bundle of rags at first glance. But as your eyes adjust, you see the outline of a small wooden doll, its paint almost entirely worn away. You step back, swallowing. You move on. In the third cell, the walls are carved with scratches, rows and rows of tally marks. You trail your fingers over them, counting out loud until you lose track. You wonder if the person who made them ever stopped. The air here is thick with the past. It clings to your throat, makes it hard to breathe. You press on, though every step feels like an intrusion. At the end of the hallway, a door larger than the others stands ajar. You ease it open and step inside. The torch reveals a chamber twice the size of any other cell. A table dominates the center, its surface stained black in places you'd rather not imagine too closely. A single chain dangles from the ceiling, swaying slightly as though someone has just let it go. You turn in a slow circle, taking in every detail. A rusted brazier in one corner, a set of tools arranged in a neat line along a shelf, hooks set into the walls. You wonder how much of what you've read about medieval dungeons was exaggeration, and how much was understatement. Historians still argue whether this fortress was particularly cruel or merely ordinary in its practices. You suspect cruelty becomes ordinary faster than anyone likes to admit. You don't linger. Back in the hallway, you pause to listen. Nothing. Only your own breath. You retrace your steps past the cells. Each doorway feels like a throat waiting to swallow you. At the foot of the stairs, you hesitate. The air here feels heavier than before. You look back one last time. The chain in the large cell is still swaying. You climb quickly, not daring to look down. When you reach the storeroom again, the air feels lighter, though your pulse hasn't settled. You cross to the door you ignored before. It leads, you hope, back toward daylight. Your hand finds the latch. You pause, drawing a slow breath. Whatever waits beyond this door, you'll face it. Because to stay here, trapped with the memories of this place, would be worse. You push the door open and step through, torch lifted high. Section 12. The door yields with a reluctant groan. Cold air spills over your face as you step across the threshold, feeling at once relieved and unsettled. The chamber beyond is broad, wider than you expected, and even in the flickering torchlight, you can tell It was meant to impress. A great hall, though not the feasting hall you passed earlier. This was something else, a place for judgment. Your boots scrape over flagstones worn nearly smooth by countless footsteps, petitioners, supplicants, prisoners. You glance up and find the ceiling soaring overhead, ribbed with beams so massive you can't imagine how they were hoisted into place. At the far end of the hall, a dais rises. Upon it stands a chair carved from dark wood, almost a throne, though it lacks the ostentation of a king's seat. You walk slowly toward it, the torch spitting little sparks with every step. When you reach the dais, you pause at the bottom stair. The chair is draped in a faded cloth that might once have been red. A sigil is barely visible, the outline of a stag surrounded by thorns. Again, that same emblem you've seen elsewhere. You wonder if the person who sat here saw themselves as protector or tyrant. Historians still argue whether this hall was used more for governance or punishment. You suspect it was both. Power rarely distinguishes between them. You climb the dais and set your torch in a bracket beside the chair. The shadows pull back, revealing more of the room. 2 rows of benches run parallel to the walls, their surfaces carved with names and symbols, graffiti left by the bored, the desperate, the defiant. You move along the front bench, trailing your fingers over the marks. A date, barely legible, carved deep into the wood. You whisper it under your breath, though you don't recognize the year. You lift your gaze to the wall behind the dais. A vast tapestry hangs there, so faded you can barely make out the figures. Knights and courtiers, a stag with a crown of thorns, a woman in a flowing gown. You step closer, squinting at the weave. Her face is familiar. It's the woman from the Queen's chamber. You reach out, brushing the fabric with your fingertips. Dust billows, and for a heartbeat, the tapestry seems almost alive, writhing in the draft like something with lungs and memory. You step back, heart thudding. The hush deepens. It's then you notice something you'd missed. A small door set into the paneling behind the dais, nearly invisible in the gloom. You cross to it, testing the latch. It opens silently, revealing a narrow passage no wider than your shoulders. You hesitate, but curiosity is a stubborn thing. You duck inside. The air here is stale, tinged with something metallic. Your torchlight glances off walls so close you could touch both at once. The passage slopes downward. You follow it, counting steps to steady yourself. 27, 28. The walls change. Smooth plaster gives way to rough-hewn stone. A trickle of moisture seeps from the ceiling, cold against your knuckles when you brush past. At the bottom, the passage opens into a chamber you can't quite name. A place of preparation, perhaps, or of confession. A table stands in the center, draped with a cloth so filthy it's impossible to guess its original color. You lift a corner carefully, revealing rows of shallow bowls arranged in neat ranks. Some hold scraps of herbs turned to gray dust. Others contain dark stains you don't wish to identify. You let the cloth fall. Against the far wall, a rack of iron implements leans at an angle. Tongs, hooks, shears. Each is tagged with a little placard you can't read. You draw in a slow breath and turn away, unwilling to linger. As you pass the table, something catches your eye, a small leather-bound ledger, half hidden beneath the drape. You pull it free, feeling the brittle spine crack under your fingers. The pages within are covered in columns of names. Some have been crossed out, some underlined. Others bear no mark at all. You close the book, throat tight. Historians still argue whether these records were lists of the accused or the condemned. Maybe it makes no difference. You set the ledger back and step from the chamber. In the passage, the air feels marginally cleaner. You climb slowly, each step harder than you want to admit. At the top, you emerge behind the dais again. For a moment, you simply stand there, breathing. The hall waits in silence. You retrieve your torch and descend. Crossing to the benches, you pause to look up at the tapestry once more. The woman's face stares down, unreadable. You whisper an apology you can't define. Then you turn and walk away. Your boots sound loud in the hush, but no one stops you. The hall recedes behind you as you step into the corridor again, feeling like you've slipped free of something you didn't fully understand. But you know it isn't over. You keep moving, the torch your only anchor in the dark. You walk for what feels like hours, the corridors blurring into one endless passage. Stone, soot, shadows. Your torch grows shorter with every step, wax dripping down your fingers in thick beads. The heat should be comforting, but it isn't. It feels like the last fragile tether to the living world. Eventually, you reach a door set deeper into the wall than any before it. The wood is blackened with age, reinforced by iron bands etched with tiny symbols, wards, perhaps, or warnings. You stand with your palm resting against the cold surface, collecting your breath. Whatever lies beyond this door, you sense it will not be a place you can leave unchanged. You push it open. The darkness inside seems to recoil, as though offended by your intrusion. You raise your torch, and the shadows flee to the corners, revealing the chamber inch by inch. A chapel, the one unlike any you've seen. The architecture is unmistakably sacred. Ribbed arches overhead, stained glass windows clouded by centuries of grime, a stone altar raised at the far end. But there is no peace here. Instead, the air tastes stale and sour, thick with the memory of desperation. You step inside, each footfall muffled by a carpet of dust. You cross slowly toward the altar, eyes flicking over the walls. Faded murals still cling to the plaster. Saints with hollow eyes, angels whose wings have decayed to ragged outlines. Near the door, a reliquary lies toppled on its side, its contents spilled in a heap of splinters and bone fragments. You crouch, studying the jumble without touching it. Some of the bones are small, too small, and you look away before your mind can insist on answers you don't want. You rise, your breath of fog in the cold. Historians still argue whether this chapel was abandoned after a siege or before, whether its desecration was deliberate or simply the result of time's slow appetite. Your gaze returns to the altar. A cloth the color of old blood drapes over the stone. Upon it rests a single object, a chalice, silver chased with designs so intricate your eye can't follow them all. You approach and lift it carefully. It is heavier than you expect, the rim dented, the interior crusted with something black. You set it down again, unwilling to imagine the last ceremony it was used for. A draft slithers across your neck. You turn, scanning the chapel for movement. Nothing. You look back to the altar and notice a shallow basin carved into the floor just in front of it. You step closer and peer down. Bones. Dozens of them, laid in a careful pattern you can't decipher, as if whoever arranged them believed order might appease whatever had been unleashed here. You retreat a step, the torchlight trembling. Against the nearest pillar, a ledger lies open on a sloped stand. You cross to it, drawn by the familiarity of the shape. Its pages are brittle, edges curling inward like the petals of a dying flower. You lean close, squinting to read the cramped script. Names, dates, notations in Latin, a tally of the faithful or the condemned. You trace one line with your fingertip. The ink smudges as though it has been waiting all this time to stain another hand. A sound interrupts your thoughts, a slow creak somewhere overhead. You tilt your head back, torch lifted. The choir loft. A narrow stair winds upward, the railing carved with delicate vines. You climb, boots scuffing the dust from each tread. At the top, the loft opens into a platform lined with benches. Cobwebs drape every surface, trembling in the draft you can't source. You cross to the railing and look down into the chapel below. From here, the altar seems smaller, the bones in the basin more like a mosaic than a grave. A movement catches your eye. In the far corner, the shadows thicken. For an instant, only an instant, you see the shape of a woman. She stands very still, head bowed, her hands clasped as though in prayer. Your breath stops. The figure does not look up. When you blink, she is gone. You grip the railing until your knuckles ache. Carefully, you descend the stair, each step an effort. Back on the chapel floor, you cross to the door without pausing to look again. As you pass the altar, you whisper an apology you're not sure you believe. The hush that answers feels like acceptance or dismissal. You step into the corridor, shutting the door behind you. And you do not look back. You stand in the passage, letting the cold of the door seep into your spine. For a long moment, you stay there, one palm flat against the ancient wood, breathing as if you've climbed a mountain instead of a staircase. When you finally push away, your hand leaves a print in the dust. You walk on. The corridor narrows again, ceiling pressing close enough that you feel its weight in your shoulders. Your torch, guttering in the stale air, becomes your only claim to existence. One flicker away from darkness complete. You reach a landing where the passage splits in two directions. One way slopes downward into a blackness so complete it could be the end of the world. The other rises, winding in a slow curve you can't see past. Instinct urges you up. Your boots scrape the steps as you climb, each tread warped by centuries of passage. About halfway up, you pause, sensing the walls change around you. The stone here is smoother, the mortar finer. Whoever built this part of the fortress cared about the impression it made. You reach the top and step into a hall that smells of old cloth and dying embers. The Great Solar. You know it without question. This was where the lords and ladies took refuge from cold and ceremony alike, a space that was private but not quite intimate. The room sprawls before you, wide as a ballroom but segmented by low partitions and faded curtains. You walk slowly along the nearest wall. A massive fireplace yawns open, its grate half buried under soot. Above the mantel, a carved panel shows a stag rearing over a row of symbols you can't decipher. Historians still argue whether this carving was meant as a crest or a warning. You leave it and drift toward the center of the room. Here, low tables stand amid tattered cushions, as though someone meant to return but never did. You pass a narrow divan draped in a moth-eaten blanket, its brocade pattern almost worn to memory. In the far corner, a screen has toppled, revealing shelves lined with scrolls and small boxes. You crouch, setting your torch in an iron sconce driven into the floor. One box lies open, its lid propped against the wall. Inside, small wooden tokens gleam. Gaming pieces, you think, though you don't recognize their design. You pick one up, turning it in your palm. The surface is warm, though your fingers are cold. You set it back carefully and rise. Your foot bumps a low table. A sheaf of papers skitters across the flagstones. You stoop to gather them. The writing is precise, though time has bleached the ink almost to invisibility. A record of expenses, or perhaps a list of grievances. Someone's account of how the world failed them, line by careful line. You replace the papers in a neat stack, though you doubt order will matter to whoever comes after you. A draft wafts across your face, bringing the scent of old flowers. You turn, searching for its source. Against the far wall, a tall cabinet stands ajar. You cross to it and peer inside. Cloth, layer upon layer of folded garments, some little more than rags. Near the top, a cloak of deep green, its hem embroidered in silver thread. You tug it free and shake it out, watching dust billow in soft clouds. You imagine the woman who once wore it, walking these same halls, certain her footsteps would echo forever. You drape the cloak over your arm and step back. A glint catches your eye. In the cabinet's base, something metallic gleams. You kneel and pull it free. A circlet, finer than the one you saw in the Queen's chamber. This is no ornament. It is a coronet, unmistakable in its authority. You hold it up to the torchlight. Silver filigree winds in delicate knots, set with stones the color of a bruised sky. You set it carefully atop the folded garments and close the cabinet door. Some symbols are too heavy to carry. You retrieve your torch and cross to the tall window on the western wall. The shutters stand open, just enough to admit a blade of moonlight, bright and cold. You lean into it, eyes closed. For the first time in hours, you let yourself believe you might find your way out. A hush settles across the solar, deeper than before. When you open your eyes, the room seems unchanged. But in the darkness beyond the window, you think you glimpse movement. Something pacing along the outer wall, just beyond the reach of light. You don't look closer. Instead, you cross to the far archway, feeling every step. Whatever waits beyond, you will meet it. Because to stop here, to sit among these relics and believe this is all that's left, would be the same as surrender. And you are not ready to surrender. You raise your torch high, step beneath the arch, and vanish into the next corridor. The corridor swallows you in a hush, so complete it feels like you've slipped underwater. Your torch crackles in protest, each footstep sending echoes ahead that never quite return. You pause, one hand pressed flat to the cold wall, and force yourself to breathe slowly. This part of the fortress is older. You feel it in the slope of the floor, in the way the stones seem to lean toward you, as though eager to confide all they've seen. You walk on. The passage widens at last into a vault-shaped chamber. For a moment, you can't tell what you're looking at. Rows of low shapes rise from the floor in uneven ranks, draped in canvas. You step closer, lifting your torch. Beds, dozens of them. The infirmary. The word drifts through your mind with a chill you can't shake. You cross to the nearest cot, the canvas pulled tight over a shape that suggests someone never rose to leave. You don't touch it. Instead, you move along the central aisle. Each bed bears some sign of its occupant: a bundle of cloth, a small wooden token, a carved charm strung from the bed frame. You pause by one whose mattress has collapsed into itself, sagging under the weight of absence. Historians still argue whether this infirmary was meant to heal or simply contain. Disease was as potent a siege weapon as any trebuchet. Perhaps they closed the door one day and never opened it again. Your torch dims as though in sympathy. You cross to a table against the far wall where jars stand in neat rows. You lift one, its label cracked beyond reading, and peer inside. Dried petals, nearly colorless. You set it back, unwilling to guess their purpose. Beside it, a basin holds the remnants of a poultice turned to dust. The smell rises, bitter and faintly metallic. You turn away. Along the rear wall, a row of cabinets stands ajar. Inside, bandages lie folded in precise stacks. Some are marked with brown stains that never washed clean. A shallow bowl holds needles, their points still bright. You pick one up, weighing it carefully. Then you lay it back in its nest of linen. A narrow doorway gapes in the far corner, half hidden behind a curtain of moth-eaten cloth. You cross to it, pulling the fabric aside. The room beyond is smaller, windowless, lined with shelves that once held supplies. Now the shelves stand bare, save for a single ledger left open on a high desk. You approach, the hush deepening. The entries are written in a tight hand. Dates, symptoms, names. You trace one line, feeling the indentation of each letter. One column repeats over and over, confined. Your pulse stutters. You close the book gently. When you turn back to the doorway, your torch flares, as though stirred by an unseen draft. The curtain shifts against your shoulder. You step into the main infirmary again. In the stillness, you hear something, softer than breathing, yet undeniable. A rustle. You hold your ground. Slowly, deliberately, you move down the aisle. Your torch picks out each bed in turn, every shape unmoving. You stop near the end, breath held tight in your chest. The last bed is empty. The mattress is stripped to bare straw, but a shape crouches beside it. Small, hunched, wrapped in a blanket the color of old bone. Your heart climbs into your throat. You take one slow step closer, torch raised. The figure does not look up. You open your mouth, though you can't imagine what you'd say. Before you can speak, the shape shifts, and the blanket slides away to reveal only a bundle of cloth, arranged just so. You exhale in a ragged rush, knees weak with the relief you don't entirely trust. When you turn, you do it carefully, unwilling to disturb anything that still lingers here. At the door, you pause. You look back once more, memorizing the rows of beds, the quiet they contain. Some histories never make it to parchment. Some memories survive only in the places that refuse to forget. You leave the infirmary in silence. The corridor welcomes you back with darkness. And you keep walking, because stopping would mean admitting this place is stronger than you. And you are not ready to admit that. You keep moving. The corridor narrows, the walls squeezing in so close you must turn your shoulders to pass. Your torch hisses with each breath you draw, and every step sounds like it might be the one that breaks the hush. When the passage finally widens again, you nearly stumble. The floor dips and flattens into a space that feels different. The air is heavier here, thicker, as though it has been trapped too long to remember how to move. You lift your torch. A crypt. The word forms in your mind with the finality of a closing door. Stone sarcophagi line the walls, each lid carved with a sigil or a name you can't quite decipher. The torchlight dances across their surfaces, making the engraving shift in ways you'd rather not look at too long. You step forward. The nearest tomb bears the outline of a sword and crown. You brush your fingers over the carving, feeling the cold bite of the chisel's marks. Historians still argue whether these were true rulers or merely pretenders. Some dynasty swallowed by time before it could claim anything lasting. You walk on, past stone effigies whose faces have worn smooth, their features lost to centuries of water and dust. At the far end of the chamber, an arch opens into a second crypt, smaller and even darker. You hesitate before crossing the threshold, listening for the sound of your own heartbeat. You step through. This space feels closer, the ceiling low enough that you could touch it if you raised your hand. Rows of niches are set into the walls, each filled with neat stacks of bones bound in cloth. The site is almost orderly, domestic, in a way that feels more unsettling than any ruin. You lift your torch higher. A ledger lies on a narrow plinth in the center of the room. You approach, careful not to brush against the fragile remains on either side. The cover is leather, the corners capped in tarnished brass. You open it. A single name repeats over and over. No dates, no explanations, just the same hand copying the same word across 100 pages. You close the book slowly. A breath of air stirs your hair, though the air here should be dead still. You turn. A shape stands in the doorway you just passed through. Tall, unmoving. You raise your torch. Nothing. Only the empty arch, black as the pit of a sealed well. You swallow hard, your throat too tight to speak. When you step back into the first crypt, the air feels almost kind by comparison. You cross to the central aisle, boots scuffing the thin layer of dust. One of the sarcophagi has shifted, just enough that you can see a hairline crack where the lid no longer sits flush. You know better than to look inside. You keep walking. Near the exit, you pause. An alcove sits half hidden behind a drape of rotted velvet. You lift the cloth, expecting another tomb. Instead, you find a small altar carved from a single block of stone. A candle stump sits in the center, wax melted into a pale pool that clings to the basin. You light it. The little flame flickers, a fragile echo of your torch. For a moment, the crypt feels almost gentle, like a place that remembers what it meant to be revered. You let the curtain fall and step away. At the threshold, you look back one final time. The candle burns steadily, untouched by the drafts that followed you. You don't know what you've woken by passing through this place, but you know it saw you, and somehow, you feel that it is willing to let you leave. You slip into the corridor, your torch still burning, though shorter now, more stem than flame. Your shoulders ache with the weight of every room you've crossed, but you keep moving because there is no turning back, because to stop would be to become part of the silence yourself, and you are not ready to be forgotten. You walk on, though the air feels different, cooler somehow, as if each step draws you closer to whatever end waits beyond these halls. Your torch shrinks to a stub between your fingers, its light barely stretching across the corridor. You press forward anyway. The passage slopes upward, winding in a lazy curve that feels endless. Your boots scuff patterns in the dust, marks no one will see unless they come searching for you, the way you've searched through all these chambers. When the floor levels, you pause, your breath ragged. A door stands ahead, massive, iron-banded, sealed with a lock so old it's almost part of the wood itself. You rest your palm against it. The cold seeps into your bones, but the surface yields under your touch. With a sound like a sigh, the door swings inward. Beyond it waits a hall unlike any you've seen. The walls are dressed in faded tapestries, their colors long since bled to the same somber palette. A vast hearth yawns open at the far end, the grate filled with white ash. This was no prison, no crypt. The great hall. You step inside. The remains of a long table dominate the room, chairs scattered like fallen soldiers. A candelabra has toppled onto the stone floor, wax frozen mid-drip across the flags. You walk slowly past each chair, imagining the people who once gathered here. Lords with ambitions too large for their skin. Ladies with secrets stitched into their hems. Stewards counting every coin that passed through their hands. Historians still argue whether this hall was the site of treaties or betrayals, whether the fortress fell to siege or starvation, or something older than either. You pause at the end of the table. A goblet rests near the edge, its rim tarnished to the color of old bruises. You pick it up. Dried residue clings inside, a thin black crust. You tip it over, watching flecks fall to the stone. Some last toast no one finished. A draft teases your hair, though no window stands open. You look up. A balcony runs the length of one wall, its railing carved with interlacing vines. Once, perhaps, musicians played there while the hall filled with voices. Now it watches in silence, a gallery of shadows. Your gaze falls to the hearth. Ash mounds in the grate like snowdrifts. You cross to it, kneel, sift the powder with your free hand. Under the top layer, something glints. A fragment of metal, thin as a petal. You pull it free, a pendant, shaped like a stag crowned in thorns. The same sigil again and again, as though this place refuses to let you forget who ruled it. You close your fist around it, feeling the edges bite your skin. You stand and set the pendant on the mantle. Some relics don't belong in pockets. You turn from the hearth and cross to the dais at the far end of the hall. A pair of chairs sit side by side, their cushions flattened to brittle husks. You stand before them, torch raised. One bears a plaque, Sede Regis. The other, Sede Reginae. The throne and consort seat. Empty now. You set your torch in the nearest sconce. In the dim glow, the hall seems to breathe, shadows expanding and receding like a lung that never stopped working. Your eyes drift to the doors behind the dais. Tall, heavy, unmarked. You cross to them, palms pressed against the panels. The wood is warm. A sound blooms behind you, softer than footsteps, more deliberate than wind. You turn. A figure stands at the far end of the table. You cannot see a face, only the outline, a silhouette shaped like a woman, shoulders draped in the memory of a gown. You do not move. She does not either. The hush swells between you, thick as water. Then she lifts her hand, slow, graceful, and points to the doors behind you. You swallow, your throat raw. When you look back, the figure is gone. You draw a breath that feels stolen, and you push the doors open. Moonlight floods in, cold, absolute. You stand in the threshold, the night reaching for you. Behind, the hall waits, silent, patient. Ahead, the courtyard gleams under frost, every flagstone bright as glass. You step forward, because to remain would be to vanish into that hush forever. And you are not ready to be part of this place's memory. Not yet. You stand there for a long moment, the cold moonlight pouring over your face like a benediction you didn't know you needed. The hush you carried from the fortress still clings to your shoulders, but it no longer feels as though it's trying to drag you back inside. Instead, it feels almost like an exhale, some ancient part of the place finally releasing you. You take a single step onto the frost-glazed flags of the courtyard, feeling your boots slide just a fraction before finding purchase. The air smells of frozen iron and something sweeter you can't name. The sky stretches overhead in a vault of black so pure it makes your chest ache, every star a pinprick of brightness that insists on being seen. Behind you, the great doors stand open, revealing the hall in which you have left so many questions unasked. The empty thrones, the ashes, the tapestry you didn't dare to pull down. You tell yourself you will not look back again. You lie. One last glance over your shoulder. The silhouette of the doorway frames the darkness like a wound. You could step through and be swallowed all over again, become another ghost pacing those corridors. You turn away. Your breath comes easier once you start walking. The courtyard stretches wide in all directions, encircled by the broken arcade. Here and there, arches stand intact, their keystones engraved with symbols whose meaning has gone wherever the builders did. You pause to study one, an open hand, fingers splayed, a mark of welcome or warning. Historians still argue about such things, but standing here, you suspect the truth was more complicated. Maybe it was both. A flicker of movement in the corner of your eye. You pivot, torch raised out of habit, though the flame is down to the barest stub. Nothing. Only moonlight and the long shadows of the columns. You step carefully across the yard, feeling the frost yield under your weight. In the center stands the old fountain, its basin choked with ice, the central pillar etched in a pattern of thorns. A stag rears from the column's crown, its antlers tangled in frozen vines. You rest your hand against the rim. The stone is so cold, it burns. You close your eyes. It would be so easy to stand here until dawn, to pretend that you could understand this place just by willing yourself to. But some stories don't want to be deciphered. They only want to be witnessed. You open your eyes again. A narrow path winds away behind the fountain, leading to an arched passage you hadn't noticed before. You follow it, steps deliberate. The corridor is roofless, and snow has drifted into shallow drifts. You brush your hand along the wall as you walk, as though to reassure yourself that you're still moving forward. About halfway along, you find another set of footprints, smaller than yours, pressed crisply into the snow. They lead ahead, unbroken. You crouch, studying them. The frost has only just begun to soften the edges. Someone else came this way not long ago. You stand, your heartbeat too loud in your ears. You keep walking. At the corridor's end, a wide arch opens into a chamber that is half collapsed into ruin. 3 walls remain. The 4th reduced to rubble that spills down the hillside beyond. Moonlight spills through the gap in a great silver sheet, catching the frost until the whole space glitters like a hoard of diamonds. You step to the threshold and pause. A breeze drifts in, stirring the loose stones. You draw a breath that tastes of snow and something older. Something that makes you think of iron keys and voices speaking words you were never meant to hear. Your torch flutters and dies. The darkness comes all at once. You wait, willing your eyes to adjust. Gradually, the outlines emerge. Floor, walls, the open sky beyond. You take a step forward, then another. At the chamber's edge, you rest your palm against the broken wall and look down. The valley stretches below, white and silent. A road winds through it, almost invisible under the drifts. You realize you could follow it, that you must. You look back one last time. The fortress stands behind you, an immense silhouette etched in silver. Empty windows gaze down like blind eyes. Some part of you still wants to turn around, to seal yourself inside these halls and never leave. To become another story no one remembers how to finish. But you don't. You step over the threshold. Moonlight pools at your feet, bright enough to guide you. You take a slow breath, and you begin the descent. You walk on, feeling each step loosen the knots that have pulled your shoulders tight for so long. The darkness has a softness here, as though the night has exhaled all its sharp edges and left behind nothing but a patient hush. You follow the path down the slope, where frost traces delicate feathers across every stone. When your boot scuffs the ice, it breaks with a brittle music that seems almost too pretty to disturb. You pause, letting your breath drift into the cold, watching it swirl like a ghost reluctant to leave you. The road ahead is pale in the moonlight, an unspooled ribbon winding past low walls and the dark silhouettes of bare trees. You slow your pace until each movement feels deliberate, more an act of permission than of effort. There is no need to hurry, no reason to look over your shoulder to see if the fortress still watches. You reach a place where the stones give way to earth, and you step off the path. The grass crunches under your heel, stiff with frost. But beneath that thin armor, the ground yields. Even in this cold, the earth keeps its quiet promise to hold you up. You close your eyes. For a moment, you simply stand there, feeling the last heat of your body drift into the night. The hush deepens. It is neither welcoming nor hostile, only patient, only present. When you open your eyes, you notice details you missed before. The tiny bead of melted frost trembling on a bent blade of grass. The faint scratch of a distant branch against an unseen wall. The way your own heartbeat feels slower now, steadier, as though it finally believes there is no more danger left to outrun. You step forward again, guided by a moon that seems content to watch without judging. The trees thin ahead, revealing a low rise crowned by a scatter of stones that might once have been a boundary marker. You climb to it and turn in a slow circle, taking in the emptiness all around you. It feels less like a void and more like an invitation. Below you, the land stretches away, folding into shallow valleys and dark hollows. Somewhere in that darkness, there will be roads that lead away from this night altogether. Roads that will carry you beyond the stories you have walked through, into places where no one will care what you've seen or what you chose to leave behind. You draw a long breath and let it out slowly. The cold tastes clean, almost sweet. It fills your chest without stealing anything from you. When you step down from the rise, the hush seems to follow like a companion. It is no longer the hush of fear or confinement. It is simply the quiet of a place that has offered you what it could and now waits for nothing in return. You keep walking. The frost breaks beneath your boots, small brittle shatters in the hush. You feel each step as a small declaration that you are still here, still moving. You pause one last time to look back. The path behind you is empty, the fortress long since swallowed by the dark. Whatever shadows it carried have stayed behind, and you realize, with a slow certainty, that steadies you more than any warm fire could, that you don't need to carry them any further. You turn away and let the night close around you like a gentle arm. The hush lingers, but now it feels like a blessing. You walk on, quiet and unhurried, into the waiting dark.